So let's check our progress. We have 3 interfaces being used for the data plane, the DMZ, the inside, and the one that leads off to the service provider. We also have an IP address configured on the management interface, and that's how we've been managing Firewall 1. As our last test regarding the basic core functionality of the firewall, let's put a PC behind the firewall and make sure that PC has access out to the public internet as well. So in our topology, we're going to use this little icon here to represent our PC, and any virtual machine that you have in your lab environment, we basically could use for that. All we need to do is make sure it has an IP address, make sure it has a default gateway that points to 10.123.0.71 in our topology, and also very important, on this firewall, it has by default a security policy that says, no, not allowing anything through. So we're also going to want to set up as a test a security policy here on the firewall that basically says allow everything. And also, because this device is coming from an address on the private RFC 1918 address space, we also want to tell this firewall as part of this rule to go ahead and do port address translation on traffic that's being routed through the firewall. And that way, as it gets routed up to this device, it'll also do the game of NAT/PAT as well before it forwards it off towards the final internet. So let's start here on Firewall 1. We'll set up a security policy rule, basically allowing everything through. And then we'll set up our VM here as a client on this 10.123 network and verify that we have connectivity out to the internet. So here on the firewall, to configure a security policy on the left-hand side, we're going to click on Policy and Objects. And then the first option right here is Firewall Policy. So we'll click on Firewall Policy. It has a default implicit deny that says, no, no traffic allowed through the firewall, period. And that doesn't mean the firewall itself can't send traffic. We just did a trace a few moments ago in the last video between itself and the internet. However, this firewall policy is for data plane traffic that's trying to go through the firewall. So we want to allow the PC to go through the firewall. So we're going to click on Create New to create a new security policy. I'm going to call it Allow Everything. So that's just the label for it. And this is going to be for traffic that comes in on port 2 that's trying to be routed out of port 4. We'll have a whole nother discussion regarding security policies, but for now, I just want to set up a very simple security policy that says allow everything. We're getting the source IP address for our PC. We don't care. So we'll go ahead and say all addresses are viable. And for the destination where that PC is trying to go to, we're going to say all addresses are viable once again. And then we're going to specify for services, which represents what's being used, we're going to say all as well. So whether the client is using ping with ICMP, or whether the client's using HTTP or HTTPS or some other protocol, it's all going to be allowed by this security policy. So the action is accept, and then by default, the NAT option is enabled, which means that it's going to do effectively port address translation behind the scenes, and everything that comes in is going to swap out the source address of the client and replace it with its publicly routable address on the outbound interface of port 4, which is the 23.1.2.71 address. All right, I'm also going to go ahead and regarding logging, I'm going to turn logging on for all sessions, not just for security events. And that way, if we need to troubleshoot, I'll have logging information available for us. And we'll click on OK. All right, fantastic. We have this security policy that's currently set up, allowing effectively everything from port 2 going out port 4. So the routing decision is made first, and then it considers the security policy and sees whether or not it's willing to allow that traffic to flow. So with that in place, let's go over to my ESXi environment and let's go grab our virtual machine. So I've got this little, lots of virtual, there we go. I renamed it FG for FortiGate Linux client. And let's just take a look at it real quick. So this little Linux virtual machine is connected logically to a port group on the 10.123 network on the inside to the left of our firewall 1. So that looks good. And let me see if I have a snapshot for it. I do. I've got a snapshot. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Restore Snapshot. And the benefit of the snapshot that's currently running is that it's going to be very quick to boot. You basically restore the snapshot of it running, it restores the memory state, and boom, it's up and running in just moments. So I'll go ahead and click here to bring up a console. Then I'll minimize ESXi. And here is the console. In fact, let me minimize the GUI as well. And let's use the topology as a backdrop. So this little icon here for this virtual PC 1, that is representing the Linux machine, which I just brought up in a separate console right here. So I think this was a DHCP client by default, and I didn't set up DHCP services on the firewall. So let's just go configure this for a moment. So we'll click on Applications. We'll go to System Settings. Here's Network. We'll double click on that. We'll click on Advanced Settings. And regarding IPv4, I'm going to go ahead and specify a static address. So we'll go here to manual and click on add, and let's use 10.123.0. Let's use 254. Tab over. We'll use a 24-bit mask, and the default gateway is going to be 10.123.0.7071, like that. And for DNS, let's tell it to use 8888. And then we'll click on save. All right, so there's our IP address. Let me bring up a command line and just verify that that took. So we'll do an ifconfig for Ethernet 0. Press enter. It's not Ethernet 0. What is it? Oh, it's ENS33. Fantastic. So there's our IP address. Oh, that's not the right IP address. So let me do this. That's the IP address it had previously from DHCP. So now that we have configured an IP address, I'm just going to reboot this virtual machine. So I'm going to go ahead and close that. Click up here and click up here on the power button. Click on shutdown, and I'm going to go ahead and restart it. So with the static IP address that we just configured, that'll take hold, or hopefully that'll take hold once we reboot this virtual machine. And there are other options as well. We could have bounced the interface itself to shut it down, bring it back up. That probably would have done it as well. But I just want to do a nice clean start. All right, let's check. I'm going to get applications, terminal, and we'll do an ifconfig. Press enter. And sure enough, there's 10.123.0.254. And let's verify we can ping our default gateway at 10.123.0.71. And because we enabled ping on that interface, which was interface port 2, it's able to respond to us. We'll do a Control-C to stop that from the client. Let's also do a ping out to 8888. That's the internet. Let's do a trace just to be sure. So we'll do a trace route out to 8888. Oh, okay. Well, let me add some software then. Sudo apt-get install traceroute. Press enter. Put in my password. Now, the fact that this is working means that there's a whole bunch of stuff that's working in the background, including DNS as well. And now if we do a trace route to 8888, yeah, life is good. That is working through the firewall. So while I have internet connectivity, let's do some updates. I'm going to click here on App Center and click on Installed. And I've got 38 components with updates. I'll click on Update All, and I'll let that finish in the background. And the other thing I'm going to do before I'm done with these machines is once they're all updated, I'm going to go ahead and power off Firewall 1, which is right here, and then update my snapshot of that virtual machine. That way I can go back to it faster. Also, time synchronization is really important. So with these firewalls, these FortiGate firewalls as VMs, probably the safest option in the lab environment is to go ahead and do the work, power them off, and then once they're powered off, then take the snapshots in a powered off state. That way when they boot up, they can synchronize their time correctly, because if you take a snapshot and it's running, the time may be from like yesterday or earlier, and it may complain about that or not work correctly if the time isn't able to sync up. So just as a rule of thumb for the firewalls, I'm going to go ahead and snapshot them when they are powered off, because they do boot fairly fast in a virtualized environment, so it won't take that much extra time. And to that end, let me share with you how you can shut down a firewall correctly. So you can go to Admin up here and hover over System, and then simply select Shutdown, and it'll go ahead and do a graceful shutdown of the firewall. And I'm not going to do it quite yet until the update is done on this VM. Oh, it looks like it's done. Awesome. So with the VM, I'm going to snapshot it with its running state. So here's my little Linux client. I'll right-click. I'm going to hover over Snapshots, go to Manage, and I'm not going to save my old snapshots. I'm going to delete the old ones, remove. All right, so now it doesn't have any snapshots. I'll take a fresh snapshot, and I'll call it FG Linux with static address on the 10.123 net. That way when I see it, I'll know exactly what that is. Click on Take Snapshot. I'll let that finish in the background. Here is our current task, so it's working on that. And while that finishes up, let's go to the firewall and power it down. So here at the firewall, we'll go ahead and click on Admin, hover over System right here, and then click on Shutdown. And then we are going to create a log message saying done. And then we'll click on OK. All right, so that is shutting down. And in a moment, when that's shut down, that'll show up right here as Firewall 1 no longer running. And there it goes. The little green Go icon is no longer there. And then we can right click here, hover over Snapshots, and then click on Manage Snapshots. And this is on ESXi. And I'm going to go ahead and delete all the existing snapshots. And then click on Take Snapshot, and then label this appropriately. Firewall 1 with static default route. And it also has the IP addresses on the 4 interfaces that we're using. And because it's not running, it's not asking me if I want to snapshot the virtual machine memory as well. So click on Take Snapshot. And now the cool thing about this is that we could start this firewall up, practice with it, make changes, and if it wasn't correct or we want to start over from that starting point with the interfaces configured in the default route, we just restore the snapshot and boom, we're right back to that exact point. So I'll go ahead and close that. And because our snapshot is also done for the Linux client, we can right click there. And from the dropdown, if we go to Guest OS, the shutdown does a graceful shutdown because that virtual machine has the VMware tools installed. And it's not like just pulling the power cord, which is not good for any computer. It's going to do a graceful shutdown. So I'm going to go ahead and do a shutdown right here. And if you're not sure whether or not your hypervisor is going to do a graceful shutdown, you can always go to the actual virtual machine itself and shut it down from there. And it'll automatically power itself down that way. So I'm going to go ahead and click on yes. I hope this has been informative for you. And I'd like to thank you for viewing.